the super simple podcast email guest request script to get you on podcasts, to get you guest speaking on podcasts easier than you thought possible, and how to reply when you start getting engagement because of this email, and email number 2 to send if and when some of the people that you're sending the podcast pitch email to don't respond at all. So that's what we're going to talk about in this part 2. Again, most specifically, we're going to talk most about how to reply when you start getting engagement from this email, and then also email number 2 to send for when people don't engage at all. Listen in.
You know when someone is selling from stage and at the end the audience gets up and rushes to the back of the room to buy? That's a table rush. My name is Mischa Z, and the Table Rush Talk Show is all about bringing you the tools, strategies, and tactics that you can use to grow your audience and inspire them to buy.
Oh my gosh, this is the best. These are the best email scripts, templates ever to get yourself booked on the podcasts. And again, this is coming from Ron Story Jr., who I'm doing some work with. We're partnering up to help you, my dear listeners, guest speak on more podcasts. But anyway, he's got a ton of experience, and holy mackerel, he gave me some shortcuts that are awesome and effective and are getting me booked on shows. So I also want to say that, one of the first sales jobs I had back in the day, and this is what this is going to speak to. Sometimes our brains can think it's too easy. That's too easy. That's too simple. That can't work. How could that possibly work? Or it's not intelligent enough, if that makes sense. And I had all those hang-ups back when I had first started selling. So when I first started selling, I was a commodities broker, retail commodities, and we were selling wheat futures, corn futures, oil futures. The price of oil is going up or the price of oil is going down. And we'd have these long, crazy scripts. And you'd get somebody on the phone, and then you'd start reading the script, but you wouldn't deviate from it, right? It was like there was no flexibility. There was no, you just stuck to the script. And, I suppose talking about this now and looking back at it now, I worked at it for a couple years, a good, couple years with this one company, and finally started to learn how to, use those scripts in a story, right? So it flows naturally. You continue to come back to those bullet points, shall we say, right? Like you start the conversation, but you're always coming back. If the prospect diverts you, you're always coming back to those key core stories, selling points of the script, right? But there's what's called the front line. And the front line, that's the, the 1 or 2 sentence thing that you say when you're telemarketing to try and create engagement. It's the hook, right? And so anyway, when I first started, I was very stubborn. It had to be complex. It had to be intelligent, all this stuff. And, people were handing me scripts and I was using them, and they were long and complex. and it can be frustrating for the person on the other end of on the other side of the phone. Keep in mind, this is the 90s and the 2000s when I'm doing a bunch of telemarketing. It's a different world today, telemarketing-wise, but the same themes apply. But anyhow, so I got trained with these really long and complex scripts. And when I ended up getting out of the commodities business, and keep in mind, I finally started having success in the commodities business. I found my groove. I found my way to tell stories. I learned from people who were like, ditch those crazy scripts. Try this. Try these types of stories, these types of scripts, right? Which were more, what could I say? I don't know. I think you get what I'm saying. So anyway, I remember the first job I had after I'd left the commodities industry, and I went into telecom, and I wrote this crazy long script to sell like data co-location, or it was VPNs or something like that. I can't even remember what it was. But the manager who hired me, he was so excited to have me because I was a machine and would call anybody at any time and loved it. I loved the telemarketing game. And so I show him the script I'm going to use, and he's like, Mischa, that's a book. Like, can't you make it more simple? And at that point, I was still pretty stubborn and arrogant. And I was like, oh, it'll work. Trust me. And of course, I forced it and got it to work and had success and enough that everybody was happy. But I made it harder than it needed to be. And I knew it intuitively. I was like, yeah, like I'm making this harder than it needs to be. So I finally get a job in mortgages. Back in 2001, December of 2001. I'll never forget it. December 16th, 2001. Darren was my boss. And Darren says, I start writing a story, and he's like, nope. Get rid of that story. Here's your front line. And it was as simple as, could I interest you in our discounted mortgage rates? And he's like, that's what you're going to say. And I was like, okay. So I was putting together these telemarketing lists, and then he goes, and then he goes, these are the bits of information that we need to get a loan done. So get these answers. And I was like, okay. And so I'll try and cut to the chase and fast forward here, because you're waiting very patiently for me to give you the simple replies and how to get on podcasts, and I'm telling you long stories. But just suffice it to say that I knew my job was to get an appointment and get in front of people, and so I just went straight to the point and was like, can we meet on Tuesday or Thursday? Right? That's what they would say back in the day. If you were trying to set up appointments, you would ask, which time is better, this day or this day? And then when they said yes, this time is best, that's when you start pre-qualling them. That's when you start finding out, are they a prospect that you want to work with? And it's genius. And that's kind of what these emails are doing. You're finding out, is this a podcast for you? You're finding out, can you guys work together? Right? Anyway, and my career just took off from there like gangbusters. It was crazy. I learned a bunch of other telemarketing tricks, email scripting tricks, all kinds of scripts. And thank you, Zig Ziglar and all those guys. But anyway, so point is, here we go. What's going to happen is you're going to send out a email number 1, and it's going to say, podcast host, I found your podcast name, podcast and you have a great show. Are you looking for an interesting guest to be on your show? If so, what are the next steps? Thanks. And then you're going to send that email. And you're going to send out, you're going to get 1 out of 10 emails are going to create engagement. Okay? And this is my favorite part of this whole thing. If they say no, if they reply and say, nope, we're not taking guests, well, then you have an opportunity to give them your second offer, right? So Ron's like, hey, if they say no, then you give him your second offer. So he goes, Mischa, you're on podcast. You have a podcast, right? And I said, absolutely. And so he said, well, great. If they say no, then ask them if they'd like to be on your podcast and give them and have a 10-minute exploratory call to see if it would be a good fit. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's genius. And he also said, or if you know it's a podcast that has the audience you want, ask him if you can throw an ad on their podcast. And he's like, if you know it's the audience you want, you're trying to get in front of them, well then, there you go. So there's 2 ways you can reply. So I'm not out there wanting to put ads on other people's podcasts yet, but soon I will. But so he said. So what I did was I've started getting replies from some people that say, oh no, we've got plenty of hosts, or plenty of guests. We're all good right now. So I sent the reply. Well, gosh. I said, so someone said to me, no, thanks, Mischa. I'm not accepting any guests. It typically doesn't end up being a good match when people reach out to me, and I have more than enough interesting people on my docket that I never seem to run out of people. I appreciate you just asking rather than just sending a pitch. Best of luck to you. So that's a fairly firm no, right? And what a great objection as well that she gives, which is it never works out when people send an email request to her. And so, well, there's an objection, and if you learn how to handle that objection, well, then you're going to be getting on a lot of podcasts, people. So anyway, here's how I handled that objection. Hey, Sarah, thanks for the quick response. And noted you have stacks of interesting guests. I'm starting to interview guests for my show again. My audience is blank. Any interest in being interviewed? We could do a 10-minute exploratory call, and then I put book here. We can have a quick talk to see if you'd be a good fit. I actually said we could do a 10-minute exploratory call. Book here. We can have a quick talk and see if it would be fun. And then I put my calendar link in there. I'm out walking, obviously, and people with dogs were passing each other, and of course the dogs started fighting right as I was going by. So hence the barking dogs in the background. So that's how you can handle a no. A no, we're not taking guests, or no, we're not interested. So then the next rounds of responses I've been getting are yes, or yes, send me your podcast topic ideas, or yes, I'd love to have interesting people on the show. Do you know anybody? Which are all great responses and engagement. And so basically how you respond to them are some version of, hey, fantastic. Here's a little bit about me. Here's my podcast topic ideas. Let's have a 10-minute exploratory call. You can book it here, or just simply let me know the next steps. And Ron said, hey, you take control of the conversation by saying, let's do a 10-minute exploratory call to see if we're a good fit. And that adds a ton of confidence for everybody. And then you can actually find out if that podcast is indeed a good fit for you, if that host is a good fit for you. And then thirdly, if you as you are sending out your podcast pitches to try and get onto shows, you won't get any responses at all. And sometimes people will forget to respond. They're like, oh yeah, I'll respond tomorrow, or this or that, or we'll get to it later. So what you do is you send that podcast another email. And I was talking to Ron, and I'm like, all right, so let's craft up the email number 2. And he goes, no, you just send the exact same email. You just add one sentence. And I'm like, what? He goes, yeah, it's super simple. Don't make it more complex than it needs to be. So he goes, here's the sentence that you add. And I'll just read the whole email. Sarah, I wanted to follow up on an email I sent earlier this week. I found your podcast, and you have a great show. Are you looking for an interesting guest to be on the show? If so, what are the next steps? Thanks, Mischa. So you simply add the sentence, I wanted to follow up on an email I sent earlier this week. And then you just hit send. So you just, super simple, keep it easy. And I tried it. And guess what? It worked like magic. And so sure enough, I am getting 1 out of 10 engagements. So I send out 10 emails and I get 10 responses. I email 10 hosts. That's a better way to say it. And some of the hosts, you got to send a couple emails. And I'm sure I will get to email 3, 4, and 5, right? Follow up. Don't give up. The fortune is in the follow-up. So, all right, that's what I've got. If you want to know more about guest speaking on podcasts, click on the link in the show notes. Jump on my wait list. Let's get you on the Influence Army. Let's get you in the Influence Army. That's it. I'm done. Have a good day out there.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Table Rush Talk Show. For resources to help you sell your stuff, go to belove.media/resources. That's belove.media/resources. And be sure to subscribe, comment, 5-star, and share. Thank you again for listening.